Penguin Random House Audio presents The Hidden History of America at War, Untold Tales from Yorktown to Fallujah, by Kenneth C. Davis. Read for you by Arthur Morey, Mark Bramhall, and Paul Boehmer, with an introduction and afterword read by the author.
We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that the nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. Abraham Lincoln, November 19th, 1863.
Hello, this is Kenneth C. Davis, the author of The Hidden History of America at War. Introduction.
It is sweet and honorable to die for one's country. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Horace, Odes, 23 B.C. There never was a good war or a bad peace. Benjamin Franklin, September 11th, 1783. War is not merely a political act, but also a political instrument, a continuation of political relations, a carrying out of the same by other means. Karl von Clausewitz, 1833. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling which thinks that nothing is worth a war is much worse. John Stuart Mill, February, 1862. War is barbarism. It is only for those who have neither fired a shot nor heard the shrieks and groans of the wounded who cry aloud for blood, more vengeance, more desolation. War is hell. William Tecumseh Sherman, June 19th, 1879.
War stories. We have been telling them for a very long time. You can start with Bible tales of Egyptians drowning in their chariots in the sea, or a shepherd boy with a slingshot killing a giant, or the epic siege of Troy in Homer's Iliad. Move on to the American classics, from James Fenimore Cooper to The Red Badge of Courage, Hemingway, The Killer Angels, and The Things They Carried. Then watch all the way through Hollywood's long love affair with wartime, from The Birth of a Nation to Saving Private Ryan, Apocalypse Now, Glory, and The Hurt Locker. Tales of men in combat are at the heart of our literature, culture, history, and mythology. Unfortunately, many war stories have been told and retold so many times, repackaged and often heavily embellished along the way, that the truth behind them has been whitewashed and airbrushed, buried under a thick gloss of romanticism, lyricism, patriotic fervor, and propaganda. As Walt Whitman, mournful observer of America's Civil War, once wrote, "The real war will never get in the books." My first taste of war and battle came in the backyard of my boyhood suburban home, the lawn and woods behind my house in Mount Vernon, New York, filled in for the Alamo, Gettysburg, and Normandy. Weighted down by a small armory's worth of toy weaponry, my friends and I did regular battle with Santa Anna's Mexicans, the Johnny Rebs, and the Nazis. Then we went up the street to the playground and played some stickball. This was the late 50s and early 60s. John Wayne, Audie Murphy, and Charlton Heston were comfortably fixed in the pantheon of America's war gods. War, as we knew it, was glorious, exciting, fun, and harmless, and soldiers were revered as tough guys with soft hearts. My late father was one of them. He had served in North Africa and Italy during World War II and along with several of my uncles, was one of those greatest generation veterans. These were the men we had learned growing up who had been willing to sacrifice everything for their country and each other. Ordinary citizen soldiers, they were the noble, patriotic average Joes who had whipped the Nazis and the Japanese. My father rarely spoke of his wartime experiences, a silence I now greatly regret. I had never really asked, "What did you do in the war, Daddy?" But I could tell from the mention of a glorious sunrise glimpsed in North Africa, or the few choice words in Italian, as well as the mean meatball recipe he had brought home, that his wartime experiences had mattered deeply to him. I still believe that his army years were among his happiest. I never knew for sure. Instead, we went to movies like The Guns of Navarone and The Longest Day, sat together to watch television shows like Combat and The Rat Patrol, and went camping with Army surplus sleeping bags and tents to places like Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York or Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I still have my souvenir of that latter visit, a wooden toy revolver stamped with the dates of the battle, July 1 through 3, 1863. I also possess a powerful recollection of standing on that battlefield, Lincoln's hallowed ground, and feeling that something extraordinary had happened there. But then a switch was thrown. Within a few years, my playlist had a new sound. The folk songs and anti-war anthems of Bob Dylan and Richie Havens spoke to me far more convincingly than the fighting soldiers from the skies, elegized in Barry Sadler's 1966 hit song, Ballad of the Green Berets. By 1968, the answer blowing in the wind meant that John Wayne's jingoistic bravado was no longer box office boffo. The Green Berets, the movie inspired by Sadler's tune, was described by a New York Times critic as so unspeakable, so stupid, so rotten and false in every detail that it passes through being fun, through being funny, through being camp, through everything, and becomes an invitation to grieve. My reading list had changed, too. Johnny Tremain, the book that brought the American Revolution alive for me, was replaced by Johnny Got His Gun, Dalton Trumbo's bleak story of a quadriplegic victim of World War I. This was more than shifting literary tastes. Radical changes were reshaping mass media and the political landscape. Late in February 1968, when legendary television newsman Walter Cronkite, fresh from a reporting trip to Vietnam, told the country, "We are mired in stalemate," there was no longer any doubt that America had undergone a seismic shift. The times, they were a-changing. The subsequent withdrawal of President Lyndon B. Johnson from the 1968 presidential campaign, followed by the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, continued the violent tremors that were reshaping American attitudes during Vietnam. Racial unrest was turning bloodier, and the anti-war movement and the response to it were growing more violent, culminating at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago as protesters, journalists, and even some delegates were bludgeoned by Chicago cops in what was later called a police riot. In that fateful summer of 1968, I had also begun to contemplate the reality of going to war. I turned 14 in that watershed year, and I had come to see that war was no longer fun and games in the backyard, or 60 minutes of excitement on network television. And it was certainly not a gallant but doomed charge across a Pennsylvania wheat field in the summer sun. After the killings of anti-war protesters by National Guard troops at both Kent State University in Ohio and Jackson State in Mississippi in May 1970, a broad sense of an unraveling America only deepened. When the government announced an end to most draft deferments and a shift to a lottery system beginning with the draft class of 1970, I soon got as close as I would ever come to military service. As high school graduation neared, with my 18th birthday and selective service registration upon me, I took an Air Force pre-enlistment exam. Thinking that the Air Force was a palatable alternative to
Sample complete. Ready to continue?